Eylon Levy is the spokesperson for the Israeli government. He is now joining us live from Tel Aviv. Sir, it's good to see you and thank you for making time for us. Mr. Levy, we have seen some heartbreaking images coming from the Rafah border crossing of residents scrambling for aid. The United Nations also says that hunger levels have grown across the Gaza Strip amid Israeli attacks. The Israeli government did promise that they will provide some sort of relief to Gazans. What happened to that? Why is this level of desperation hiking or rising?
What we're seeing, unfortunately, is a shameful attempt by international officials to deflect blame onto Israel to cover up the fact that they have been covering up for Hamas. Israel has, since the beginning of this war, placed no restrictions whatsoever on humanitarian necessities going into Gaza. We want to see as much food, water, medicine and shelter reach the people of Gaza. The problem is there's a backlog at the Rafah crossing, and the problem is that UN agencies aren't able to distribute the aid at the pace that Israel is inspecting it. We have the capacity to more than double the entry of aid into the Gaza Strip, but the UN agencies on the ground aren't able to distribute it quickly enough. And on top of all of that, we know that Hamas has been stealing aid, and I'm sure that you've been covering those images as well of Hamas gunmen hijacking aid trucks. And unfortunately, all the UN agencies that are feigning concern for civilians in Gaza, the World Health Organization, the Red Cross, UNICEF, UNRWA, none of them have a single word of criticism for Hamas stealing aid from the desperate civilians in Gaza who need it. And we think it's about time that international agencies point the finger very clearly at the source of this crisis, and that is Hamas, the terror organization that launched this war with the October 7th massacre and is doing its best to manufacture a humanitarian crisis because it wants to generate sympathy, to generate diplomatic pressure, to get Israel to stop defending itself, and so Hamas can be let off and get off the hook for the October 7th massacre.
All right, let's talk about another matter at hand. There are calls for Israel to return to negotiation table and discuss the hostage situation, come up with a workable solution for the hostages' sake. But the Israeli government is not willing to compromise. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that a possible talk is imminent with Qatar, but the international community in fact says you are the problem. Why is that?
No. Let's put some things in order. On October 7th, Hamas brutally abducted 250 of our people. And we have been doing everything possible since in order to bring them home to safety. That is a central goal of this war, to bring back the hostages and to destroy the terror organization that took them hostage. In order to do that, we have been putting unrelenting military pressure on Hamas. It was that military pressure that brought Hamas to agree to the last pause in the fighting. We wanted hostages back, they wanted a pause in the fighting, so in exchange for releasing hostages, they got a few days of a breather. But then Hamas, which started this war on October 7th, restarted this war on December 1st, when it decided to terminate the hostage release pause and start shooting rockets at Israel instead of giving us back all the women and children. We're putting more military pressure now on Hamas because that is the only thing that brings Hamas to a position where it is willing to talk and willing to negotiate to give up hostages in the first place. So really the narrative that we're seeing in some places in the world, as if Israel needs convincing or Israel needs pressure put on it in order to do everything possible to get our hostages back, is a complete distortion of reality. Israel is the only international actor right now lifting as much as a finger to try to get the hostages back, while the Red Cross is not visiting them. The Red Cross is not putting on enough diplomatic pressure in order to visit the hostages. And countries around the world are trying to call on Israel to stop the fighting instead of ramping up the military pressure to get back the 129 people who are still trapped in the Gaza Strip and whose families desperately want them back safe and sound.
Okay. 2 days ago, the IDF confirmed that they had mistakenly killed hostages in Gaza. Is there any sort of action that will be taken against the persons who committed the act? Or rather, what's the Israeli government doing about that? What are you telling the families?
This was a horrific tragedy and a terrible mistake. And I can tell you that everyone, when they heard the news, was stunned into silence because something like this should not happen. We've gone into the Gaza Strip to try to get our hostages out. And the fact that some of them could have been killed by our forces is horrific. Now, our forces are acting in very difficult circumstances. They are fighting Hamas in door-to-door fighting in a dense urban area where Hamas is constantly trying to lure them into ambushes. We've had Hamas playing recordings of voices in Hebrew and putting out booby-trapped dolls and children's bags to try to lure our forces in, to try to confuse them, to try to do everything possible to put our civilians and the hostages in harm's way. And it's important to remember that ultimately, although the army takes full responsibility for that horrific incident, it is Hamas that bears responsibility for the fact that those hostages are in danger in Gaza in the first place. And we are immediately learning lessons so that a horrific tragedy like this can never happen again, as we fight to bring back all 129 of the remaining hostages and to bring to justice the brutal army of terror that abducted them and has been holding them in inhumane conditions in the Hamas terror dungeons ever since.
All right, I've been talking to the spokesperson for the Israeli government, Eylon Levy. As always, thank you.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.